Nonwe for the welcome, and thank you, Jacques, for the invitation. I'm really thrilled to be joining you and also to be sharing this work. I haven't had many opportunities to share work from the history of intimacy, partly because I had a concussion almost immediately before it was published. And so I went inside my brain in a way and didn't come out for a few years. So I'm really honored and delighted to be able to share this work and step out of my brain and share that as well. So I will read to you from these poems, and also I'll read you one or two earlier poems, because something interesting happened to me in the course of writing the history of intimacy, which, by the way, took 12 years and should not be seen as a model by any writer. It's no reason to keep a project going for a decade unless you're busy doing other things, or unless something needed to mature in that time. And, you know, I certainly was doing other things, and hopefully there's a certain, boldness about these poems that fits that. So an interesting thing happened while I was writing this book, and that is that I found myself writing sequel poems. That is, I had written quite carelessly, I think, in earlier books and earlier works about members of my family, for instance. And some of them spoke back to me, and then eventually in new poems, and contested what I had done, what I had said. And I ended up like an exploitative writer writing another poem about that. And I'd like to share that with you, and hopefully we can have a philosophical discussion about that, and maybe an ethical deliberation about that. But that's the reason I might read some earlier poems. I will end with very new work. I mentioned to you that I had to go inside my brain because of an injury, and stepping out of that space has been very hard and not entirely complete. And so I'd like to share with you some of the work that has come out. And by come out, I mean come out of my mind. It hasn't actually been published. And so I'm going to share some very new work with you. Poetry for beginners. In the evening poetry class for beginners, a girl in a thick brown coat she doesn't take off, breathes in deep, and risking something says fast, "My boyfriend's in prison. I'm here to find out how to write to him through the bars." And someone laughs. And she pulls herself back into her coat, and from inside looks past us, and the next week doesn't come back. And I think of her for years and what poetry is. I think, this is my origin, why poetry is a risk, is betrayal, and the memory of the first question, how not to be alone. When Nonwe mentioned that I had taken an extramural class in 1999, that is an account of that class. I want to show you the cover of this book, because I think books are so beautiful. And if you're lucky enough to have one, Nondra was just showing me her new book. It's to feel the weight of it in your hand and to look at it and to know the meaning of the cover. It is so precious, something I really cherish. So I want to show you some covers of books while I read. This next poem is a very different one, and a fellow South African who also is based at Penn State, like me, has said to me that this is unlike any of my other poems, which I was not aware of, but I'll share it with you, and perhaps that too we can talk about. Tell me what you see. In the small caravan parked permanently next to the traffic department with a handwritten sign, ID photos taken here. Its wheels rusted into place. The young old photographer with dreadlocks and a tired poet's face is shaking his head from side to side, muttering some version of no. What kind of photographer are you? Asks a woman ahead of me. You don't make the people smile. I just do my job, lady, and then I get out of here. You'd also be like this if you worked here. No, you mustn't let them change you, my boy. I would still be smiling. Yeah, maybe for the first 2 months, but then they drive you crazy. Just before me in the caravan, a woman in a long black skirt and black veil unties the loop of fabric knotted at the back of her head, and her face briefly emerges. The young old photographer sees everything. Hundreds of unclaimed photos line the inside of his caravan, the making of identity interrupted and turned into small, sad signs of something else. We don't look at each other, so we look at the walls, at the faces no one came to collect. Someone stands and someone offers their seat. Exact change. I sit on the plastic bar stool and he takes my picture with a small digital camera, like the one you take holiday photos with. No tripod except his legs and arms, the background behind me, the faded fawn of the caravan wall that disappears anyway in the end. Why do we all hate our ID photos? Our faces without spectacles, hair tucked behind the ears, eyes too wide. The moment our identity is being made. The photographer runs a small HP photo printer on a car battery, humming constantly, like the cues and the questions and the promises of whatever keeps this government building working. In the hall with its rows of plastic chairs, a man ahead of me presses his finger onto the ink blotter, 1,000 index fingers before him. Then he leans his forehead against the eye test machine. Tell me what you see, the officer says. To clean the ink from his thumb, she gives him a single square of toilet paper, torn carefully at the perforated line. In the last queue to pay for my temporary license, I slide 4 photos, my ID book, completed form, and exact change into the metal slot under the glass. Ma'am, put your left thumb on the ink pad and place it inside the block. She watches me sign in the right place and pastes a strip of sellotape over my name, fixing my identity for 6 months, at least. Now I want to read you one of the sequel poems, which means that I have to read you the earlier poem first. And that earlier poem is from the collection 100 Silences. I was checking who I had dedicated this book to, because I have the feeling that I've dedicated all my poetry to my parents. Actually, I was wrong. I dedicated this one to my partner. But my parents are all This poem is about my mother, who is almost exactly 30 years older than me. And we both went to UCT almost exactly 30 years apart. And this is her experience of going there in the 1950s and 60s. Something that she had told me more than once, but because I grew up in apartheid, and apartheid was a really extraordinary experience. I think those of you who were born after it should engage in an oral history project and just find out what it was like to live with your mind in that space. Because it was really an unimaginable experience. So because I grew up under apartheid, it didn't strike me for a long time that what my mother was telling me about was really unbelievable. When I realized what she had given me. She'd given me a legacy. This is the legacy I carried with me to UCT. I forget to look. The photograph of my mother at her desk in the 50s has been in my purse for 20 years. Its paper faded, browning, the scalloped edge bent, then straightened. The collar of her dress folds discreetly. The angle of her neck looks as though someone has called her from far away. She was the first in her family to take the bus from Claremont up the hill to the university. At one point during the lectures at medical school, Black students had to pack their notes, get up, and walk past the ascending rows of desks out of the theater. Behind the closed door, in an autopsy Black students were not meant to see, the uncovering and cutting of white skin. Under the knife, the skin, the mystery of sameness. In a world that defined how Black and white could look at each other, touch each other, my mother looks back, her poise unmarred. Every time I open my purse, she is there, so familiar, I forget to look at her. Now I will read you the title poem from the History of Intimacy. The History of Intimacy. 1. You remember it because it's a wound, a cut, 20 cuts, the name for canings on the palm, on the knuckles, on the buttocks, a finely graded order of pain that we, who should not exist, were assigned for our failures. 2. You keep your whitener, Mike shouts in 1987 across the heads of students sitting on Jamison steps. And the sudden pale silence shows we are no longer in uniform in the quad at Livingston High, teasing, hey, why did you look through me as though I don't exist? And this slipping from existence we called keeping you white. But saying it out loud reveals how we've learned to measure our existence. 3. In the video store after I've ordered a film, my cousin elbows me. Why are you putting on? Putting on. Transitive verb. Putting on what? Putting on skin. Putting on not nothingness. 4. When the Group Areas Act is abolished, my mother aches to go back to the street she was removed from. And it is we, grown attached to the scar we call home, who say, no, we don't want to live in a white area. This time, ceding it ourselves. 5. Mother, how do I write about you? As a medical student on night duty, you learned to sleep so lightly you could wake in an instant in an emergency. And for the rest of your life, your body became a body that never again could sleep through the night. You told of one evening when, for some reason a little irked with my father, you left the table early, returning to the bedroom by yourself, and found my sister blue for lack of breath. To this day, you recall what anger gave you, how it saved my sister's life. Anger, breath. Since the beginning, you have been breath and poetry. You told me how Black students were asked to leave the room during the autopsy of white bodies. And of my writing about this, you said, that is my story. That is not your story. And now, with the illness you could not speak of for years, Mother, am I once again turning your words and your silence into a poem? 6. In 1988 at Crawford train station, my brother and I find a blue plank hand-painted in yellow letters. Non-whites only on one side, whites only on the other, thrown away by the fence next to the tracks. Picking it up, we see the two sides of the sign lay back to back, each half resting against its opposite, intimate and inverse, but unknown to each other. We knew this was history someone had made by hand, then hidden and tried to forget. We bring it home and come across it sometimes in a corner when we're looking for something else. A few years ago, my little sister got married, and she asked me to read a poem at the wedding. And she asked if she could see my work so that she could select a poem. And I did, I shared it with her. And she said, Gabeba, oh my goodness, do you only write about dead children and war and injury? And then I realized that you've got to put love in there, or else the people will be very unhappy. So I'm going to lighten the atmosphere a little and give you some love. This poem is called Not You. After 19 years, I love that you carry two books with you always, The Poetry of Birds and the late essays of John Berger. I love that you read the same books over and over, Pessoa's The Book of Disquiet and Yi Fu's Space and Place, as though visiting an infinite enigma. I love that you love words seriously, that they matter so much they make you angry and silent. I love how you sit next to physicists and astronomers and speak with them of infinity, and they delight, then sadden you, because their relation to numbers holds no mystery. I love how you tell me this, certain I know. I love that you read me a poem each night from the ones you've gathered all the years, even if night is 6 hours apart, and I'd rather face the agony of your not body. Yes, I love that you love me, though since the start, I love you has been your way to say good night, goodbye. I love you when you are tired after 2 hours on Skype. In the early days of the internet, when we loved each other on dial-up, phoning through the web in 10-minute segments with aching 2-second delays, I loved that you were not a poem, and you were with your silences. Right now, you are reading me The Resistance of Rumi to the Limits of Poetry, and I'm still trying to understand infinity. Living in Cape Town in the 3-year drought, I read of people on other continents trapped in a prison of rain, how it bends them down with its opacity and scale. And amid my compassion is envy for what they are drowning in. I think poetry is the flood for the not you I've prepared for from the start. Okay. Bit of love there, bit of love. My mother is very present in this collection. And as you could see, this is not always welcome. Although, just to let you know, I did ask her afterwards as well, is it okay? Is it okay that I've written about you? Is it okay that I've written about that? And she said yes, but I don't know if it's a question that you can answer or ask in that direct and often brutal way. So I'm going to read you 2 poems about my mother, and then maybe I can stop and we can talk. So, no name. My parents only bought in bulk or on discount, no name brands. They saved up for years, saying no to all our requests, then bought everything in cash, even the car. Eventually, we learned not to ask for things, not even to want them. Even desire was pared from us. Our salt was no name, our milk, our clothes, ourselves. In those plain white boxes with blue writing, the label of no money fell on us, stuck to our skin, told us that we ourselves were generic, interchangeable. No name was clear on our bodies. To not matter at the level of the skin was the law, but to not matter at the level of what we wore and ate, that cut deeper than law. Now, after all those decades of discipline, something is loosening, being overwritten by the body, by the present. My mother grumbles about a spoon or doek she cannot find in the endless maelstrom of the house. And I try to solve the loss by repeating something I've heard from her all my life. Daesma dunya sahuta. These are only earthly things. But I am on the earth, she replies, suddenly unanswerable. Yes, she is on the earth, and Parkinson's has given her permission to turn to what has been refused, deferred, forbidden, not now. Not, non-white. The power of that negative, that emptiness against the fullness of white. No. During apartheid, we created a potent no of our own in order to resist, to struggle. We understood that to withdraw ourselves, to disappear deliberately, to call attention to our absence would make our non-matter. If we don't exist for you, we bargained, how does it feel when our money, our labor, our presence doesn't? Our potent no's grew and boycotts cut against the non and against the non-existence of us. We screamed against the blank, the no name. We refused. We said no to the non. But it was not yes. And no against non is not yes. It was still raging against. And on the other side was fullness, desire, yes. To us who had been made into fractions, into nothing, into not on this earth, Black offered a new home, a fullness. And yet it was a public fullness, a fullness for the era of privation. We had boycotts, we withdrew into our complex silences and absence, but behind them was a private hurt, the hurt of the none. And so upon freedom, no did not protect us from a certain emptiness. When freedom came, we thought our public fullness was enough. We thought we were ready for the pell-mell factories of desire and debt. We learned to speak ever finer and finer languages of existence, and we felt in our blood, in our bones, in our being, that existence lay in labels, in brands, in names. We rejected homemade food for restaurant buffets and wines with mythical price tags. We shuddered from the shame of rough hems sewn by our mothers after work and discarded them for the machine made, even in my house, where my father was a tailor and my mother worked for the unions, and we could recite facts about labor conditions and open borders and product dumping and job losses. But what we knew consciously was nothing to what we knew in our skin. In the old days, I would walk into a shop in Cavendish Square, 2 streets from the house in Ingle Road that my family was removed from. And already by the way I inhabited my body, I showed that I didn't belong there. I was no name. Now I can walk up to the shop assistant and hand her what I desire and pay for it, go into debt for it, and know that this is mine, and this is me. I am not generic, not no name, not nothing. Don't tell me that the small hurts don't matter, that our private emptiness doesn't count. Every label visible on the outside of the garment is a scream against none. In freedom, we wear brands on our skin until we believe what they say, until no one can tell by our clothes who exists and who does not. We buy our existence. Our bodies clothed in labels, we ourselves become brands, names. At last, we are not nothing. We exist. We are a name. On this earth, I am on this earth. Another poem inspired by my mother. The Law of the Mother. You and your sisters ask your mother if it hurts on your wedding night when your hymen is broken. And she answers, it's a membrane and it doesn't break, just gets nudged aside. And it doesn't hurt if you're gentle with each other and take your time. On hearing this, you are puzzled because everyone tells you that breaking is the sign of a good woman. But you grasp that she has told you the law of the mother. One day when you are 5, a boy in the neighborhood says, let's play mommy and daddy. And when it hurts, he warns you not to say anything to your parents. And you tell your father, and the world fissures. And who do you turn to then? To shame, an internal script you learned before the sin and rehearse again and again. Virgin, fallen, you are sentenced to your body, your bitter body, your memory. For months you forget, then in the middle of class, shame jolts through every vein in your body, driving the breath from you. This becomes such a pattern, you realize the aftermath of hurt is its own form. Sex is both impossible and the only way to be modern. How can you be a Muslim feminist when you're a virgin? No, when you're lying about sex to your friends. One night, talking with your sisters in the dark, you vow, if anyone ever hurts you, come tell me, and I promise I'll stand with you. And as you say this, the scene where Thelma works out why Louise left Texas and never went back replays in your mind, and you understand for the first time. It happened to you too, didn't it? And even on the desperate race from the police to freedom in Mexico, Louise refuses to drive the direct route through Texas, to go back there and let any part of it touch her again. You think therapy is for white people till you confide in a lecturer who wrote about rape, and she tells you to come back, and you do for an hour each Friday for a year, till you ask with a ragged throat if everything you are was born of that breaking, is a subset of breaking, is broken. She, deep-souled lesbian woman, tells you that broken is a boundary, and the body is time as well as space. And with this, you permit yourself to return to what happened, to where you shed your bones and flesh, and self threads into its casing, enters again each knot and hollow. I realized I did say that I would read some new work. Maybe I can tell you about it, since I think I arrived at the end of my time.
You can read just one for us. We're keen listeners.
Okay, great. Let's see. Okay. So the injury I experienced almost 4 years ago now was a concussion. And that concussion meant that I couldn't write anymore, not academic critical work, and not poetry, not creative work. And then I went to hospital and I received a new kind of therapy, an infusion of drugs, I mean. And this somehow seems to have both addressed the pain in my head and began to make it possible for me to scribble down some words. So this is the beginning of what I think will be something called the Concussion Diaries. And it is a piece of work that consists of what I have begun to scribble in my journal, my creative journal, which is a practice that I started in 1999. But it also consists of the journals that I didn't write, the journals that were impossible as a result of the concussion. So I have to find a language for what isn't there. And it's a very interesting challenge. I have actually been interested in absence for a long time. And so let's see if I can write it. Unfortunately, I find it not easy to find a space to begin. So maybe what I'll do is I'll leave you with that thought that it's about emptiness, and then the beginning of writing, and then trying to find a way to write about emptiness and nothingness. Oh yeah, I think that's what I'll say.
Thank you so much, Gabeba. Can we all give Gabeba a round of applause and mute ourselves and deserve
Very much.
need to warn her when you come up. Thank you so much, Gabeba. So I don't even know where we can start with our discussion, but if there are any questions, please put them in the chat or just put up your hand and I'll call on you and you can ask your question. I found your provocation right at the beginning very interesting. So when you're talking about poetry being exploitative, that I found interesting. Maybe you can return to that. So I'll take Khorata's question and maybe you can respond to that, and then we'll keep that maybe as a running thread throughout, where we discuss how poetry can be exploitation or how it can be seen that way. Okay, Khorata, please go ahead.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Hi, Gabeba. I hope you're good. I wanted to ask, how does it feel to read your poetry? And like when you're writing it, is that something like, does how it sounds matter while you're writing? Or is it something that it's mostly you're dealing with the words and then it's a different experience when you're reading it? I don't know if that makes sense. I hope it does.
It does. I'm really having to think about that experience. I think what happens is that I feel the words as I read them. So for instance, when I was reading that last poem, I was shivering. I feel the words. My partner is a filmmaker, but he was trained as an actor as well. So he tells me what it's like to portray words. And you've